So, the analysis we're diving into today paints a really stark picture. It describes the spike in poverty and homelessness in America as, well, not just a problem, but a full-blown national emergency. And it's one that's showing some deep, structural cracks in the very fabric of the country. It's a story told with a lot of data, but its impact is profoundly human.
And it all starts with this number. On any given night in America, over 650,000 people, men, women, and children, have no place to call home. That's the staggering figure that was documented, and it represents a grim new milestone.
But this number, it's not just some statistic on a page. The source material presents it as just the tip of a massive iceberg. It's the most visible sign of a much, much larger fragility, representing tens of millions more Americans who are living just one crisis away, one unexpected medical bill, one layoff, one missed paycheck, from complete financial ruin. And this is the powerful phrase the analysis uses to frame the whole issue. It suggests that what we're all witnessing isn't just an economic breakdown where the numbers don't quite add up. It's actually a moral failure, a sign that the very systems that were designed to give us stability and opportunity are, well, fundamentally breaking down. Okay, so let's look at a specific case study to see how this is all playing out on the ground. The source takes us to California, a state it describes as this land of legendary wealth that's now buckling under the intense pressure of its own success. This is what they call the wealth paradox. And right here is where that contradiction just smacks you in the face. California has the world's fifth largest economy. I mean, think about that. It's a global powerhouse, bigger than entire countries like India or the UK. And yet, when you measure that incredible wealth against its insane cost of living, it has the single highest poverty rate in the entire United States.
The human scale of this is it's staggering. 30%. That's California's share of the entire U.S. homeless population, according to this analysis. That's over 187,000 people living without shelter, in their cars, in tents, under freeway overpasses, right there in the shadow of unimaginable wealth.
So you ask, how does this even happen? Well, a huge factor is this impossible gap. You have a median home price soaring past $840,000, while the median household income is just a tenth of that, sitting around $84,000. The math it doesn't work. For so many people, owning a home is a complete fantasy, and even just renting has become a waking nightmare. And the thing that's so crucial to understand here is that this crisis isn't just hitting the unemployed or people on the margins. No, it's hitting working people, the essential backbone of the economy. We're talking about teachers, janitors, delivery drivers, people with full-time jobs who literally cannot afford to live in the same communities they serve. Now, let's look at how this unraveling looks in a completely different kind of environment. The analysis pivots to Mississippi, a state that's defined not by extreme wealth, but by a long, long history of deeply entrenched economic struggle, what the report calls a quiet collapse. So in Mississippi, the poverty rate stands at 19.3%, which makes it the poorest state in the nation. And to make that real for a second, that means nearly 600,000 people there are trying to get by on an income of less than $15,000 a year for one person. Just think about that. And in Mississippi, that poverty is made so much worse by what the report describes as a series of cascading system failures. You have a healthcare system that's in freefall. 10 rural hospitals have closed since 2010. Life expectancy has plummeted to the lowest in the entire country. The public schools are chronically underfunded, which just traps generation after generation in poverty. And even basic infrastructure, like the water system in the state capital of Jackson, is just collapsing. The analysis wraps up its look at Mississippi with this really sobering thought. It suggests that what's happening there isn't some temporary problem we can just solve anymore. It's the result of decades and decades of neglect. It's become a permanent wound, and it raises these profound questions about our national priorities and what it means to just leave so many people behind. So you have California's paradox of wealth, and then you have Mississippi's history of neglect. But here's the thing. These aren't presented as isolated stories. They actually share common threads, these key drivers of a crisis that is now popping up in different forms all across the country. And the report boils the problem down to these interconnected drivers. You can see how it works, right? You've got this immense economic pressure from housing costs that are just skyrocketing, while wages have stayed flat. Naturally, that leads to widespread food insecurity. And at the exact same time, the social safety nets are just fraying. Healthcare systems are collapsing, educational opportunities are drying up. And then you layer the absolute devastation of the opioid epidemic on top of all of that. You see, it's presented as a nationwide pattern, not just a bunch of unlucky coincidences. This crisis has a devastating impact on the most vulnerable among us, which leads to these cold, bureaucratic terms like this one: housing unstable. That is the official label given to public school children who don't have a fixed, regular, or adequate place to sleep at night. They could be in shelters, motels, or crammed into an apartment with another family. And to put that term into perspective, just look at this number from one state, Oklahoma. More than 21,000 children in its public schools are classified as housing unstable. It's a heartbreaking, concrete example of how this crisis is scarring the next generation, and it's a reminder that this is happening in communities everywhere. Ultimately, this all points to a fundamental breakdown of what so many of us considered the American promise. The idea that if you work hard, you can build a stable life. But as this analysis argues, that social contract is broken. For millions of people, holding down a full-time job is no longer a shield against homelessness. So what does this all mean when you pull all these different threads together? Well, the analysis frames these individual state crises not as separate, containable little problems, but as symptoms of a much larger national trend, a warning about a nation that is, in its own words, unraveling. The central idea here is this: California, Mississippi, Oklahoma, these aren't isolated failures. They're presented as canaries in the coal mine, signaling a systemic distress that affects the entire country. They're the warning signs of what happens when deep economic inequality is just allowed to fester and grow completely unchecked. And this really shows how the very nature of poverty itself has shifted. What might have once been a temporary hardship for a family, a rough patch between jobs that they could bounce back from, is now described as a long-term, inescapable reality for a growing number of Americans. And that marks a fundamental and deeply worrying change in the landscape of American life. And so the analysis leaves us with this final, really provocative question. It isn't just a summary of data, it's a challenge. After laying out all the evidence of a systemic collapse affecting millions, from the richest states to the poorest, the ultimate question really is about the future. What happens when a nation sees all these warnings and fails to act?